Well, I spoke German in my past life. I forgot it in this life, so you'll have to deal with with English. Who is not familiar with the word paranormal? Everyone's heard of it. The type of phenomena that doesn't fit with the accepted paradigm. There's different types of category, or there's different types of paranormal phenomena. For example, uh, superhuman or genius capabilities. For example, Mozart, we hear, compose his symphony at age 6. This was his first symphony. He was 6 years old. You have examples of, yeah, little children. In the religious field, you have, testimonies of people levitating. Are you sure the screen is fitting? Okay, hi. Have you heard of priests who levitate? In the Catholic Church, there's a whole bunch of studies on that. Of course, in Asian traditions as well, you have the notion of stigmata. You know, again, in the Christian tradition, you have men who or women who come up with these like patches of blood on their hands, meditating so much on the crucifixion of Christ. This was Father Pio from Italy or Switzerland nearby. He passed away recently. Levitation, being able to physically move an object, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. People who are like clinically dead, like the line. The heartbeat is like completely dead, and yet they come back to life, or they come back to life and even describe specific details of when they were operated or what happened during the operation. So all these phenomena fall into this category of what modern science calls paranormal or not normal. Of course, the question is, not normal to who? That's the big question. And children who claim, let's be generous and just say claim to remember their past lives. A little bit about me. How did I get involved in being fascinated about children who remember their past lives? I grew up in a normal Catholic family. When I was 18 or 19, I gave up my first year of studies at university, and I became a monk, something that I don't recommend unless you're going to be a monk for your whole life. And what fascinated me about the Bhakti or the Vedic tradition was not only the philosophy, which many of you have heard in the book called the Bhagavad Gita, which, by the way, I was actually hired by the Democratic Party of the United States government to make some publicity for Tulsi Gabbard. No, I'm kidding, but this is her being sworn into office with her hand on the Bhagavad Gita. And also the experiential side, what we call kirtan, chanting, chanting mantras, chanting names of God. Now, when I was a monk in Los Angeles, in an ashram in Los Angeles, I became quite friends with a gentleman who was married, but who's of the same tradition as me, who was living in that area, Mr. Solomon, with whom I've had a long-term relationship. And he was the one who turned me on to the books of the late Dr. Ian Stevenson. Dr. Ian Stevenson was the head of the psychiatry or psychology department at the University of Virginia, which is considered to be the top first or second great, best, most renowned public university in the United States, maybe after or just before University of California. And he started a whole department, which is now called the Division of Perceptual Studies. This is his student who's in charge now. And this department in the, greater department of psychology at the University of Virginia studies only children, cases, hundreds and thousands of cases of children who claim to remember their past lives. Dr. Ian Stevenson's last book was called European Cases of the Reincarnation Type, because you hear a lot of testimonies of these stories, mostly in countries where reincarnation is accepted as a sort of a social norm, whereas in Christian countries where the Bible says only one life, it's more of a taboo, and then you have this secular, physicalist, atheistic propaganda as well. So maybe there are just as many cases of children who claim to remember their past lives in the Western Hemisphere, but it's less spoken because there's still some sort of taboo. So in this short presentation, I'm going to ask two questions, basically. If this is true, if there are children who claim to remember their past lives, what worldview, what paradigm, if children who remember their past lives are like the top piece of the puzzle. Which big puzzle itself best accommodates that phenomena? You know, we live in the world, it's called, you know, the marketplace of religions or the marketplace of worldviews. And one of the good things that we can do today is kind of choose the worldview we want, you know, to accept in our life, if we have enough brain cells left to do so. So we're going to look at two worldviews real quickly. The Vedic worldview, based on, you know, the ancient scriptures written in Sanskrit thousands of years ago, called the Vedas, and hence the word Vedic, such as the Bhagavad Gita. And I'll make the claim, obviously, that this paradigm fits the best or best accommodates the children who remember their past lives, or who claim to. And then the second paradigm, sort of the bad guy in the story, the physicalist paradigm. The sort of paradigm that is shoved down our throat through the media, through the entertainment industry, through Hollywood, through most of, you know, chemistry and physics and astronomy classes. The basic idea, well, Harari, this famous Jewish-Israeli guy who was quite famous during COVID, this is what he has to say about consciousness. And this is a typical physicalist worldview. Listen to this.
Humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, this, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over.
In other words, as Marvin Minsky, one of the founders of the computer, said, we're basically meat computers. That's who we are. We actually we're just meat computers. That's the physicalist worldview. So, children who remember their past lives. Who's not familiar with children who remember their past lives? The phenomena, everyone's familiar with it? Yeah? Sort of? Well, here's an ABC special from a few years ago. It's about a 5-minute clip. It was aired on mainstream US television on one of the most amazing cases of children who claim to remember their past lives, the story of James Leiniger. He's maybe in his early 20s now, but, you know, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, he was a 9-year-old boy. And so this is a short little passage. And you should know that there's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases similar to this that are studied as of today in a very systematic, scientific way. So here's a 5-minute or 4-minute clip from an ABC special from about 10 years ago.
On March 3rd, 1945, a 21-year-old Navy fighter pilot on a mission over the Pacific was shot down by Japanese artillery. His name might well have been forgotten, were it not for the remarkable, some might say unbelievable story of a little boy named James.
He was obsessed with airplanes. If you look around the house, that's all you'll see. Airplanes, helicopters, aircraft carriers.
But then, when he was 2, the planes James loved suddenly began to give him frequent and frightening nightmares.
I'd wake him up and he'd be screaming and he'd always be laying on his back, kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And I'd say, baby, what were you dreaming about? He'd say, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. I talked to my mom about it a lot of times. My mom had said maybe he's remembering a past life.
What did you say?
Politely, baloney.
Here's James at age 3, going over a plane as if he's doing a pre-flight check. He would continue to say and do things that were puzzling, like the time his mom bought him a toy airplane.
And I said, oh, look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it. He said, that's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank.
A drop tank?
I'd never heard of a drop tank. I didn't know what a drop tank was.
Bruce was deeply skeptical.
He said, there has to be a logical explanation.
I don't believe in past lives. I don't believe in this stuff.
Bruce said, what happened to your plane? He said, it crashed on fire. And Bruce said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. And Bruce said, well, who shot your plane? And I'll never forget the look on his face. He went, oh, the Japanese.
Still, despite these extraordinary stories, Bruce remained dubious, almost to prove they couldn't be true. He began to piece together the details James was sharing. And what he found, he says, shook him to the core. For in many instances, the stories appeared to match the facts. James seemed to be recalling real events, real people, in the life of a man who'd been dead for almost 60 years.
Another night, Bruce had come in and he said, do you remember where your plane took off? And he said it took off of a boat. do you remember the name of your boat? Natoma. Do you remember what your name was? And he'd always say, James. His name is James. It never really occurred to us. We thought he just wasn't understanding the question. So I said, do you remember any friends or anyone else that you flew with? And he said, Jack Larson.
Bruce began doing some research. Almost immediately, he discovered that the Natoma was an actual ship, a small aircraft carrier in the Pacific called the Natoma Bay. And Jack Larson, the Navy buddy little James recalled? Well, it turns out there was a pilot named Jack Larson who served aboard the Natoma Bay. In fact, he's alive and well and living in Arkansas.
And it was like, holy mackerel. I mean, really, you could have poured my brains out of my ears. And I just couldn't believe it.
One day, while leafing through a new book about the Battle of Iwo Jima, Bruce turned to an aerial photo of the Pacific island. James was seated nearby.
He pointed to it and he goes, Daddy, that's where my airplane was shot down. And I said, what? That's my airplane got shot down there, Daddy. And I just went blank. I couldn't say anything.
By then, Bruce had become a man possessed, searching the internet, combing through military records, and interviewing men who served aboard the Natoma Bay. Finally, a breakthrough. He learned that there was just one pilot from the squadron killed at Iwo Jima.
One pilot
James M. Houston
who
Jr.
died.
You know, my meter of skepticism was starting to go over toward belief.
When little James would describe being shot down, he told of how his plane had sustained a direct hit on the engine.
We had an airplane, and I said, well, can you show me where it was? And he pointed right up to the front of the engine.
That's what makes this man's story so intriguing. His name is Ralph Clarber. Clarber was a rear gunner on a TBM Avenger that flew off the Natoma Bay. On March 3rd, 1945, he took part in a raid near Iwo Jima. As it happens, Clarber's plane was right next to the one flown by James M. Houston Jr.
I saw the hit. I would say he was hit head on. Yeah, right on the middle of the engine.
Just as little James had described it. So what do you believe now about your son James?
I believe that he had a past life. I believe that in his past life he was James M. Houston Jr.
So if this is a fact, if there's actual scientific credence to this type of phenomena, how do we explain it? Which paradigm explains it? Consciousness that survives physical death and goes into another body and has some sort of memories from the past. The Vedic paradigm, I'm doing publicity here for the Vedic paradigm because I really believe it is a wonderful paradigm that explains studies on consciousness. The Vedic paradigm explains it quite well, actually, if I could say. And here I'm going to basically describe briefly what this Vedic paradigm is. And it starts with this premise that some of you from a Hindu-Indian background may remember, this famous aphorism, Aham Brahmasmi, which in Sanskrit means I am, Aham, 100% soul. I'm 100% soul. Like I am spirit. I'm spiritual. I'm a conscious spiritual being. And the physical covering is exactly that, a physical covering. You guys are all young, but in the 80s, there was a band called The Police that was headed up by the singer called Sting. Anyone knows Sting, the singer Sting? So in The Police, they wrote a song called Spirits in the Material World. Do you remember this song, maybe some of you from... Does that ring a bell? We are spirits in the material world. And that's exactly it. And this sort of parlance is slowly seeping into, Western society. We could say like Djokovic a few years ago, Novak Djokovic, when he won the...
Think about this
is what he said.
From Andy Roddick, somebody you played a lot. He says, Novak first takes out your legs, then he takes out your soul.
Thanks, Andy. I take that as a compliment. Only the first part. The second part, I don't take anybody's soul. Everyone has their soul. We are all beautiful souls, so I appreciate everyone. We are all beautiful souls.
For a little bit more of a contemporary reference, everyone's known this young lady. And if you notice in the lyrics of one of her last hits, this is what she sings. I knew you in another life. So the idea is that we're souls. That's the Vedic paradigm. In Christianity, it's like almost there. In Christianity, it's like, okay, there is a soul. We don't reject the soul, but the soul is only part of the equation. It's only part of the equation. Like we're a combination of spirit, mind, and body. Some say that comes back to a letter of Paul to the Thessalonians in the Bible where he says, I hope you're all well, waiting for the return of our Lord and Master in body, mind, and spirit. And this very idea of body, mind, and spirit has shaped Western civilization for 2,000 years. But in the Vedic paradigm, it's like, no, we are 100% soul. C.S. Lewis is claimed to have said, you don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body. So that means, you're not really a woman. You're not really a man. You're not really Indian. You're not really Swiss. You're a soul inside a Swiss male body or an Indian female body and so on. 100% soul. And the soul is embodied. And as you know, you guys are educated, you know about this idea of reincarnation, that the soul just reincarnates from body to body to body to body. But what's the specific mechanism? Why would one person remember the body that person was in a past life? What's the mechanism? So here I'm going to ask you we're going to go to just one reference from this famous text, the Bhagavad Gita. Who's never heard of the Bhagavad Gita? Okay, it's, did you see the movie Oppenheimer? Okay, remember there's a love scene. Traditional Orthodox Hindus were so upset about that. I say, big deal, so what? But anyway, there's a scene in Oppenheimer where Oppenheimer is having a sexual, is having sex with his partner. And at one point during the act, she finds a book on the bookshelf and pulls it out and says, what is this? And Oppenheimer says, well, it's the Bhagavad Gita. And as a matter of fact, there's footage of him actually quoting the 11th or 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. When the bomb exploded on Hiroshima, he famously said, time I am coming to destroy all the worlds. So that's coming from this book, the Bhagavad Gita, which has really shaped a lot of Western society. Of course, it could have been done in another scene of the movie, but Hollywood is Hollywood. So in that book, the idea is that the real person is the self, is the soul, as I explained, and the soul is covered literally by two bodies. One is a subtle body, just like imagine if, this lady here, she has a black sweater, and then you have a gray shirt, okay? And then you're the person inside the shirt. So the physical body that we see is considered to be like the black shirt, or let's say me, this jacket. You're able to see it. And when the body, when death comes, that body is either, cremated or burned, cremated or buried, whatever, it dissolves. But according to the Gita, there's a subtle body that you see there, and that's kind of like this shirt. And that shirt doesn't come off at the time of death. That shirt, which is subtle, which we cannot perceive with our gross senses, carries the conscious self, or the soul, into another physical body, another gross external shirt. Okay? That's the idea. And in some cases, there are what's called samskaras in Sanskrit, or mental impressions, that are so profound in one embodied existence that and it happens on the gross body dies, but the impression is so deep on the subtle body that in the next gross body, that impression gets manifested. For example, with children who remember their past lives, what's really amazing is a lot of times kids will be born with a birthmark, and they'll claim, I was shot. And they'll have a birthmark that, for example, is like a little pigmentation here and a similar one back here, which could very well mean the entrance of the bullet and the exit of the bullet. And so that experience of being shot on the gross physical body gets impregnated on the subtle body, and that memory then gets manifest in a birthmark in the next body. And this Krishna, who speaks the Bhagavad Gita, speaks about in this famous statement, Purva Dehikam. In verse 43 from chapter 6, Krishna talks about one who does yoga in a spiritual sense of yoga. And after doesn't achieve success, what happens to him? And so he answers that, one fallen from yoga takes birth in a pure and prosperous home, or else is born in a family of wise yogis. Therein one reconnects to past life's understanding. And that's the key word. And in German, I hope ChatGPT did a good job. Can someone say the red part here? Dort in
Wissen aus früheren Leben.
Does that make sense? Yeah? One reconnects to past life understanding. That's the actual Sanskrit. Purva dehikam. Or, in other words, this is another German way to say it. Come on. Right? So this idea is that not only spiritually speaking does a soul remember, one's spiritual advancement from a past life, but also on the physical level, such as, for example, a traumatic death experience. Or, for example, knowing how to play guitar. This kid, I don't know, but I believe this kid must have played guitar in a past life. There's no way this kid learned how to play this by age 9. There's just no way, in my opinion. And as I said, these kids who are born with birthmarks is really impressive in terms of this notion of samskara, or mental impression. So which paradigm fits best? Well, at least when you're shopping around and you look at the Vedic paradigm, look, it seems, at least on paper, there's a perfect fit. Now, I told you about the bad guy in the story, the paradigm of physicalism, this idea, that we're meat computers, that when you physically, you are just made up of molecules and brains and neurons and protons, so when you physically die, it's over, right? You don't even have free will to begin with. You're just a meat computer, and when that death comes, it's all over. So how do you even start to give an explanation to children who may remember a past life? They don't. It's not possible. There is no past life. There simply is no. Maybe they heard something from an adult, or some sort of, blah, blah. You can have so many, but there's no such thing as a past life. So that paradigm is a dead end. It's a dead end. When I was at graduate school, I had a professor who used to quote his professor at Yale, who used to, say at the end of a class, okay, what's the big deal? Like, you went through some serious academic research and went through all the references and the footnotes, and it's like, okay, what's the big deal? So what is the big deal? The big deal is that if paranormal phenomena is real, and specifically if children who remember their past lives is a real scientific phenomena in this world, that means that there is such a thing as metaphysics. It means that we have a spiritual dimension to our life. And to ignore that is really dumb. And that we should be, aware of what's being fed to us in terms of information that feeds our understanding of the world. So it is a big deal. It's a very big deal. So, just wanted to share that with you. Thank you very much. If there's any questions or comments or discussion, I'd be more than honored to engage. Yes?
Let me restart. You said earlier that it's very common for children to remember like a past death experience. Is that the most common situation, that the child would remember a death or the actual life?
Did everyone hear? Yeah. I think not. I think the death. What I find significant in the traumatic death experiences, especially when they're related to birthmarks, is that for me those are just like. You're just, in boxing you have these the knockout punch that leaves your opponent like KO'd. So, and then you have jabs. So the jabs in this research, is remembering that, Jack Larson, for example, he was on the Natoma Bay. That's pretty far out. Or, remembering, I don't know, that your previous wife, who's still alive maybe, and can confirm, had a liking for vanilla ice cream, specific stuff like that about the life, or a particular geographical location that they know exactly. You turn right, turn left, that's exactly, the house used to be green before. So stuff like that is very, very common. And as a matter of fact, at that institute, they filter out cases, or they don't really filter them out, but they disqualify them. Like the solved cases, and they have thousands of them, are the cases where there's just zero gap, zero space for any sort of doubtful external influence that could influence their testimonies. And when there are, even if the stories are far out, but if there's too much chances of some person having told them something, then they kind of put him in another category of cases. But those that are considered confirmed, that's how Ian Stevenson used to call them. And by the way, he didn't believe in karma. Ian Stevenson was maybe even an atheist. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in the law of karma, interesting. But he, as a scientist, as the head of the psychiatry department or psychology department at one of the most famous universities in the world, said that the best explanation for this stuff, for these cases, is reincarnation. They really are remembering a past life. But yeah, the children who die and who remember a traumatic birth, death experience is just, I speak about that a lot because I like it. It builds faith for me, I've accepted the Vedic paradigm, but I'm not sure this is real. And in 2025, you go outside in Zurich, you have, I don't know how many Catholic churches are in Zurich, and Protestant churches even more, and synagogues and mosques. But how many communities that believe in reincarnation and in a personal soul, different from Buddhism, which does believe in reincarnation, but not a personal person who transmigrates from one body to another. It's extremely small. So when I look at this, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm on the right team, so to speak. Everybody wants to be on a winning team, so maybe I have chosen the right paradigm, even though it's such a minority percentage of the population today who actually believes in this stuff. Maybe in 50 years, 100 years, it'll be a lot more. But right now, I'm definitely one of the early adopters. And it's hard to be an early adopter, Anyone else? Another question?
So these studies focus mostly on children who remember their past lives, but what about later in life? Is it possible to recall it maybe?
According to the books I've read on this, a lot of times these children start forgetting their memories when they hit puberty and early adulthood. So that's the first thing. And secondly, the more time elapses, the more secure, so to speak, these cases are, because then there's more time that things could have happened, such as, I don't know, watching some TV program that talks about a place, and then they sort of internalize it and claim that that's where they grew up and so on. So not only do the children tend to forget in large cases, but even if they don't, those cases lose validity or strength as time goes on. Yes?
Do they normally remember just like one past life, or like just the previous one, or like also more?
The question is, do we remember one past life or many past lives or just the previous one? From what I've read, it really depends on the cases. Some are, some claim to, like, they'll remember a past life from, they'll start speaking, under hypnosis, they'll start speaking like a language that's been dead for centuries, and they'll have memories of being, I don't know, a villager in medieval Italy, or so here you have several centuries that elapse. The Vedic scriptures don't get that specific. So theoretically, you could be remembering exactly your past life, and that seems to be the case in most cases, but maybe sometimes, who knows, maybe you have a really boring 50 lives, and then you have one, and so, or, and so you remember your 49th life past. Who knows? The Vedic scriptures don't tell much more about that, but it's definitely possible, and we see testimonies to that effect. Other question?
After you die, do you immediately pass into a new life, or can there be like a gap?
So this is one thing that the Vedic scriptures do talk about, that there is a little time of about 9-10 months, isn't it? We hear that again and again. So a short year. What's his name? Snoop Doggy Dogg. For a while, he went through a phase where he was calling himself Snoop Lion. I gave him a Bhagavad Gita actually at the LAX airport one time, and it so happened that a few months later, the guy went into a sort of a Rasta phase in his life, under as much influence of marijuana as before, if not more, and he started claiming publicly that he was the incarnation of Bob Marley. But with all due respect to Snoop Doggy Dogg, he didn't do the math right because Bob Marley was still alive when he was born. So there's just no way that he was Bob Marley in a past life. But someone raised his or her hand.
Yeah, Mike, I would be interested to know, like, that Mr. Stevenson, you said he didn't believe in karma. Is there any reason? Did he give any reason why?
Not that I know. Not that I know. I don't know about his personal life. Maybe he was also, I don't know. You say, in academic circles, you have a PhD. Your personal life. You really keep that at home, and the academic arena is just about academics. So I don't know what. And this Mr. Solomon that I showed at Big, he doesn't. All I know that he said he doesn't believe in karma, but why? I don't know.
It's quite astonishing because that law of karma is the subtle translation of Newton's law. So, and they're scientists. It's such a logical thing. You see, and at the same time, they're supposed to be scientists. Then why they don't question what is the law, or what is how the process of reincarnation really functions?
There are some. Edward Kelly, for example, and his team in some institute in Northern California, I forgot. They've written 3 or 4 books, edited books, like Mind for the 21st Century, like a thick book, like this big, that kind of goes over the entire gamut of paranormal phenomena. And they tend to sort of see, okay, what paradigm, because they see that physicalism is just a dead end. So they say, okay, what ancient world traditions may provide the kind of wisdom that would explain. And very often they actually go to Kashmiri Shaivism, sort of non-dual Advaita Vedanta idea that ultimately it's all one, and there's this sort of underlying unitary, divine sort of consciousness. So that there are efforts. There seems to be an effort from some courageous people in the scientific community who are not afraid of losing their jobs. I remember when I was at University of California, I spoke to a professor there who was tenured, fortunately. So when you get tenure, at least in America, then you can say whatever you want. You won't lose your job. But until you get tenure, and he totally believed in past life reincarnation. But he said, like, I just got tenure, but up to now, there's no way I could speak about this stuff. So there's this very strong. If you don't know how you're going to get your next meal, maybe you'll shut up about your beliefs about reincarnation. It's unfortunate. Sir?
If in this life my soul is a human, is it possible that last life I was a cat or something?
Is it possible that you had a cat body in your past life? Well, let me look at your face. No, I'm kidding. You kind of look like a beautiful Siamese cat. No, I'm kidding. But according to this philosophy, yes. According to this philosophy, there's actually a natural evolution. It's not Darwinian. Darwinian evolution is rejected. Darwinian evolution, by chance, there is intelligent. This is where this tradition is very much similar to, Christian intelligent design. Well, intelligent design, which is mostly done by very, very discreet Christians, where there is an evolution, but an evolution of the soul that naturally, according to the laws of nature, pushes or is pushed through more and more sophisticated types of physical bodies, from super small microbes through aquatics, plants, and so on, up to a human life, and before passing through a cat body, potentially. So I know those in the woke community who love to identify as animals, maybe they're tapping into a reality from their past lives. Who knows?
But does it mean that the soul doesn't choose their body, but it just gets a new body?
In the human form, again, I'm just repeating what these Vedic texts say with as much rational thinking as I can add to it. The human body is where karma actually takes place, where your choices get reactions. But when you as a soul are engaged in other non-human bodies, there is no karma. You're just following your instinct. You're just following nature. So there's no karmic reactions to your choices. It's when the soul, and therefore this very famous aphorism or statement, Atato Brahma Jigyasa, now that you have a human body, Now it's your main duty in life is to inquire, and to inquire about the nature of the absolute truth. Precisely because the body you have gives you that facility that you didn't have when you had a cat body. I'm not implying you had a cat body in your last life, but the idea is that when you have a non-human body, you can't really, I mean, when was the last time you saw a dog say, I'm actually barking because I'm in a dog body, but actually maybe I'm more than, no, like a dog really thinks he's a dog, and you know what I mean? Whereas humans, you can have at least the capacity to kind of go meta and look at yourself acting as a human. And in that sense, this terminology, I identify as, however much it's very often very ridiculous, it kind of shows some sort of wisdom. Because when you actually say, I identify as, a woman or a man or whatever, that very act of identifying as something implies that you're not what you're identifying with. So, you're the soul identifying as. But yeah, to answer your question, according to this philosophy, you can, the soul does upgrade to a human body from animal lives. And can also go back in animals, contrary to what most Buddhist beliefs are. In most Buddhist traditions, once you get the human form, you're there. And you may come back many, many times as in a human form, but there's no falling back into animal life. Whereas in the Puranas, there is mention, now whether you want to accept it as mythology or actual history is up to you, but there is mention of humans, missing and thinking of for example, of a deer at the moment of death, and then being stuck in a deer body for one lifetime as a deer. Anybody else? Yes?
In your personal experience, do you have...
I was a dog, actually. No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
Did you have this feeling of who you were?
If I have any remembrance or...
Or is it like, for example, the cases with the children, are those special cases that they have the consciousness of who they were?
They're rare cases.
So it's not the norm in that
No, it's definitely not the norm. And you raise a very interesting question, which is theological in nature. Why, in the first case, okay, we understand the mechanics theoretically, the subtle body, the gross body, the mental impression, all that. But why would divinity, if there is a God or something, why would there even be cases like that kind of sort of go against the general rule? This we can just totally speculate here and just imagine. But one interesting theory, and this is a theistic answer, okay, it's rooted in a belief in God, that if this material reincarnation cycle is kind of a place that's not the best place to be for a soul, and the soul would rather be, free from this cycle of birth and death, maybe out of kindness, divinity or God kind of throws a few clues in the form of, cases that are kind of totally contrary to modern scientific physicalist worldviews, so that intelligent people who may not be inclined to be religious would kind of grab onto that and say, well, wait a second, and then from there start believing in the soul and in consciousness and in life after death and then maybe eventually in God. So that's my actual motivation here, guys. No, I mean, it kind of is, but my motivation is to share my belief in the whole Vedic paradigm, which is theistic, I have to admit. Are we done with time? If you're all okay, we'll take one more question.
Do you think karma from past life will influence this life, or every life is a new start?
Is every life a new start, or does karma from a past life influence this life? According to the Bhagavad Gita, what you do in a past life certainly affects, confirmed by the bell. It affects, yeah, definitely. And hence, even today, you go to India and you look at, Hindu India, the general category, Hinduism is problematic because it was a word that was invented by Muslim invaders, actually. The sin, there is no such thing as the word Hindu or Hinduism in any of the Vedic literatures in Sanskrit. But if you look at, let's say, people who follow the general Sanatan Dharma, Hinduism, even in India, who may not be, hell-bound on getting free of the cycle of birth and death and going to Vaikuntha or the spiritual world after death, they believe that, okay, if I do a lot of good things in this life, if I do a lot of punya, that's the word, right? Punya, pious activity in this life, I'll open up some schools, I'll give in charity, I'll feed the poor, I'll help, the old lady cross the street, and so on. Why? Because I believe, that's the belief, I believe that in my next life, all these good things I did in this life will be multiplied. So in my next life, if I give 100 rupees as a donation to a beggar in this life, hey, in my next life, I'll have, 10,000 in the bank. It's good business. It's not very devotional, but it's pious business transaction. Gentlemen.
Does every soul get reincarnated, or everyone? Because we have limited animals, limited human beings.
So is the limited number of species and bodies versus the number of souls?
Yes.
Theoretically, the number of souls is just almost inconceivably large. And if you believe in life on other planets, and if you believe that souls can inhabit, between me and you, theoretically, there's billions of bodies with billions of souls in each one. And so if you multiply that, or you apply that on a galactic level, on a universal level, if there's, a few less dinosaurs on one planet, well, it's insignificant, because perhaps, souls are taking more, there's, a few more bodies of lizards on planet XYZ now, So it's kind of a non-issue in the larger scope of things, with the sheer number, the mathematics of it, kind of mind-boggling. Yeah.
It's not scary that it never stops?
It is scary that it never stops, but according to the Bhagavad Gita, we have the free will, and if we desire to make it stop, then God will help you make it stop. And then you no longer take birth in the material world. You no longer have even a Swiss body. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but even a Swiss body, it's over. And then depending on the tradition, you have a different result, and also based on what you want. So some people would want to just kind of become one with this sort of one light, and you see this in the Advaita Vedanta school. Liberation means moksha, becoming one with Brahman. You become God in a sort of impersonal sense. And then in this particular theistic tradition, you go to an actual spiritual, it's very similar in a way to Christianity, a kingdom of God, where you as a soul, but as an awakened soul without the weight of a physical body that grows old and, and all that, you're eternally young, and you have an eternally young, youthful spiritual body through which you engage in loving eternal relationships with other liberated souls and with the Supreme Person in the mix of all that. So it's described as, a much, much better deal than living in the material world. Pleasure. This gentleman had a question.
Yeah, I was about to ask, if the soul can vanish.
Can the soul perish? Theoretically, we could say God could destroy the soul, because God can do everything. But according to the Vedic paradigm, and this is also another thing that differentiates this paradigm from the Christian paradigm, and that is, in the Christian paradigm, the soul is kind of created at one point. It's created ex nihilo. But in the Vedic paradigm, in the Bhagavad Gita, in this text that I always quote, Krishna talks about the soul as being eternal. An eternal emanation of God, but eternal nonetheless. Imagine a ray of the sun, and the ray is eternally emanating from the sun. It's but that's how the soul is compared to divinity, to the divine. So it's eternal. And it is imperishable. There's even one nice verse in the Gita: it cannot be cut into pieces, it cannot be dried, it cannot be wet, it cannot be evaporated. So it's kind of good news. We live on. We're indestructible as souls. All right. Well, look, it's been an honor. I'm very grateful to be among you, and thank you.